And this is also where you want to be testing your own game as much as you possibly can throughout the process. And you need to ask yourself the honest question of like, is my own game fun? Is it still fun, even though I've been working on it for months and months or years and years? And that's something we've had to ask ourselves quite a lot. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Reticence Games podcast. I'm Nick.
I'm Arman.
And we are lifelong gamers as well as video game developers. And today's episode is actually a special one because this is our 20th podcast episode, which is a pretty big milestone for us. And for this one, we thought it would be fun to kind of change it up a little bit. We talk so much about like other games, and we wanted to talk a bit about like game development itself. And for those of you who are interested in either pursuing game dev yourselves or are just interested in like how it works, we thought this could be a fun little like crash course discussion on the process. But before we get into that, we do want to mention to you guys though that there is a demo for our game Traveler's Refrain on Steam right now that you can play. And if you don't know, Traveler's Refrain is a 2D hand-painted action RPG about a wandering musician who travels to a mystical forest in search of his long-lost love, and he finds a magical instrument there in which he can cast spells and vanquish monsters. So go check that out, hop in our Discord, and let us know what you think of the game.
And that game was created by 2 developers to begin with, and now we have a bigger team.
Yes.
5-6 people. So we started at the beginning.
Yeah, small team. We pretty much taught ourselves everything too, which is something else we can kind of talk about. I
guess we should probably get started with saying like, what are the different roles that can be played on a game development team?
Yeah. Well, maybe we could just talk about like our roles on our team first to kind of break down like how we've been able to manage building it with like 5 people pretty much. So you're the lead programmer. You're kind of handling a lot of the design elements. Like we work quite collaboratively, obviously, as a small team. And because Arman and I started the project, a lot of the stuff is us just figuring out stuff to do. But it's kind of like you're more the programmer, I'm more the artist. We work on story and design and stuff like that together. And we're both in engine together. So we have our hands kind of in a lot of different pots.
Right.
But we also have 2 artists that are helping us with UI stuff as well as in-game assets. And then we have our musician, Milan, who is handling sound effects, music, as well as, audio engineering. In general.
That's a big deal too.
Yeah.
Especially with, new games coming out and, the way that audio is going.
Yeah. Yeah. Handling like level, like audio, like literally audio levels, making sure things are atmospherically feeling good.
Are all right, and with the voiceover and everything. Yeah. We'll jump into everything.
Yeah. Yeah. He's even doing a bit of programming himself too, because we're using Fmod. But yeah, I think like the basic structure of a team you need is like somebody who knows Unity, somebody who can get by with programming at the very least, somebody who can do art, and somebody who can do audio stuff. Those are kind of like the main pillars.
And by no means you have to be very good at any of these things.
Yes.
You just have to have a will to have something be to do something.
Yes.
So like when Nick and I started, obviously like he's an established artist at this point, and he did cards for different like Fantasy Flight games, and what were some of the other ones?
Disney,
I did
I've done a Disney project as well.
So and for me, like I've had 8+ years of programming, or I think it was like 6+ years at the time when I started of programming experience. But I went to college for programming. I was by no means a great programmer at all. Like when I went to college, I didn't know a lick of programming actually, and I had to learn from scratch, and that was hard for me because it seemed like everyone else around me kind of knew what they were doing already. So I had to kind of play catch up. But I came out of that experience like, hungry for more and like, just ready to kind of, learn, more programming skills. So for me, at least, haven't had too many like programming mentors. So I had to teach a lot of things to myself. And that kind of trickled into my game programming. Like, there were things that maybe I just didn't do properly in the beginning. And as we kind of worked through different projects, I look things up, and it's like I watch videos on YouTube of how to make improvements on things. So it's, by no stretch do you have to be a, extremely good at whatever you do. I think in this process, you will become really good.
Yeah,
which is the cool part about it.
I think we've both gotten way better at our own respective jobs on our projects. Like even within Traveler's Refrain project, you know, it's like the things we're able to do now, it's like night and day, speed wise, I'd say more than anything compared to what we started with.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's definitely, it's like everything else, guys. You got to start somewhere, right? And I think the just starting process is the hardest one
it is.
to begin. But I think what we want to try to say in this podcast is like, if you are even slightly interested in making games and that's a hunger you have, you got to just do it. It's like, there's literally no excuse anymore not to do it because anyone can download Unity for free. So,
and I also want to highlight like how many people have been in the situation where they boot up Unity, they do some tutorials, they start working on their own project and they get stuck on something and they just give up because it's like it's a hard problem to solve. And like I'm with you there. Like there are some problems that we've faced that we're just like, I don't even know if we can solve this problem. I don't know if I know how to solve this problem. Like I've looked all over the internet. People I've asked don't know. I remember one in general, in particular, it was back when we were working on Mask of Semblance, and I was asking other developers, how do I freeze all the other things in the game and just have this one thing move? And nobody knew. It was like, I just had to be like, all right, I guess we're not going to do this idea.
Yeah, because I guess a lot of times you have a problem that's very specific to your game. It's not like with a film where obviously there's techniques in film, but it's more of a somewhat linear process to get from start to end. Game development is like there's so many specific things because you have to account for somebody playing the game and all of the different things that they could possibly do within the thing you're building for them.
Yeah.
So,
but yeah, I think if you get stuck, it's just a good practice to do something different, like, you know,
and to have friends. Yeah. Try to meet as many people as you possibly can in the space as well, so that you do have people to ask. And I think that's been a valuable resource for us at this point in our life as well. Because we have a lot of like really tight game dev friends, like shout out Jeff, you know, we hit him up for questions all the time. And he's been able to help us with stuff. So
Jeff at Luna Wolf Studios, they just put out a really awesome product on the Unity store for scriptable assets. If you use a lot of scriptable assets in your game, like scriptable objects, definitely go check that out. They have like a spreadsheet style that really is just super sick. Like they have really cool tutorials and stuff. So check it out.
Yeah, and I feel like Discord is like the best place to meet people like that. Like hop in game dev Discords and you know, just like start talking to people. Go to game conventions as well. We'll get into that in a bit as well, in more depth. But that's another big thing. But yeah, it starts with just the idea of, you know, wanting to do something and downloading Unity. It's like just go home, download Unity. Look at a very simple tutorial for a genre of game in which you're interested in. Like, you don't want to start, you know, doing a tutorial on a first-person shooter if what you want to make is a platformer, for example, right? Like, obviously do something that you're kind of interested in. But
I think you can still pick up skills.
Yes.
You can learn things from a first-person tutorial that can give you perspective on how to do something in a third-person shooter.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
It's just if you've never touched anything at all before, obviously do something like, I would probably say a platformer or something to that extent is probably the most simple thing to begin with. But I think that's something we're also going to reiterate like time and time again. If you're a newbie and you really want to make something, like you have to make it as simple as possible, because what inevitably happens is your simple idea ends up becoming a more complicated idea than you originally thought. And that way you're still keeping yourself in a manageable state. You're not like...
Nick, maybe you can share like some video clips during this part, but some concept or like gameplay footage of when we first started versus where we are now.
Yeah.
It's so night and day. I mean, it's literally just shapes and blocks and, you know, the trees are literally like green blobs and the environment is just like a square asset. You know? So we were focusing on mechanics and things like that. And it looks completely different now, but that's where we started, right?
Yeah.
And people often think like it's daunting, right? It's like, oh, how long did it take you to make that game? Oh, 4 or 5 years. Like how? Like how does it take somebody 4 or 5 years? Like I can't even imagine working on a project for 4 or 5 years. It's probably like everyone's thought like, oh, I'm going to be stuck doing this for 4 or 5 years. And it's just the reality of the industry. It's just games just take a long time to make.
Yeah.
And, their passion, a lot of it is driven by passion.
And part-time work as well.
Part-time
That's
work,
the other
yeah.
thing too. It's like if you have the ability to make something completely full-time, you're gonna probably pump it out faster.
Right.
So
But that, extra motivation you need to like sit down after your work day
Yeah.
and work is just, it's just kind of something you need to develop over time. And it's just like a fundamental skill that you need to develop, and a behavioral change that you need to implement in your everyday life to kind of get there.
Yeah, and going off of that too, the best thing I would recommend is setting time slots for yourself to do things. That way you can stick to a schedule and treat it like it's something more serious, even if it is something more fun to begin with. Because when you treat it like it's too much fun, then it's like it never gets taken seriously,
I also want to highlight that it's important to work with people who are motivated. Like, for example, like working with Nick, because like Nick is super motivated. Like there's a lot of times where I'm just not motivated, but Nick gets me fired up to want to work on things. Like it's easier, I guess, because he shows me like cool art and I'm like, whoa, that looks badass. Like I want to like code something for that,
Yeah.
Or like he creates a new cutscene and I just get excited again. So it's like people who are kind of like workers and not just going to be lazy, because that laziness will kind of rub on you. I feel like. So if you're already a person who struggles with kind of being timely and getting things done in a timely manner, if you start working with somebody else who is like that, you're more likely not going to be able to finish that project because nobody's going to get any work done.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
And I think in general too, going off of what you're saying, like, everybody has kind of different philosophies on doing stuff like that. But I think especially for an endeavor like this, that is a collaborative endeavor, like I personally wouldn't, unless I'm doing something really small and really passion projecty, I wouldn't want to do this by myself. You know what I mean? So if you have a buddy that's also interested to work with, I would definitely suggest like trying to start doing something with someone else or with a very, very small team. As your first thing, because it's a lot of different things to manage when you're tackling everything yourself. Right. So,
and there's we can get into some of the other stuff, I guess, like the concept of writing things down is really important for starting game dev, especially like you don't need to have a GDD, but it's highly recommended that you have one because you're not going to write the story and all the elements in one night, right? It's not going to happen. You're going to forget. You're going to wake up tomorrow and you're going to forget what you thought of the day before. And if you don't write it down, like you're just not going to be able to build a story that kind of works or has mechanics that work, because you're just going to forget. By the time you implement something, you're just not going to remember what you wanted to do. Or
so let's break this down a little bit more, because people might not even know what a GDD is.
Sure, yeah.
So GDD is a game design document, and this would happen kind of beginning during your ideation stage. So this is the stage where you're kind of just like, it's blue sky. You can make anything you want. You got to just start writing things down of like, what kind of game do I want to make? What genre is it? Who is this game going to appeal to? Because like it or not, at the end of the day, if you are making a game with the idea that you're going to sell it, or at least like get people to play it, it's got to be something that other people will also think is fun. So this is probably a good opportunity to like talk to people and be like, hey, I have this idea for a game. Like, does this sound like a compelling idea to you? And this is also where you can start building your gameplay hook, which is something I think as developers, we learned that concept later than I think we should have. And this is why we're doing a podcast like this, because we want to tell you guys like, not the secrets, but like, this is a good way to, if you're starting from scratch, what we would do over again is we would figure out the hook as like before literally anything else. Or maybe we have a generalized story concept because we build more story-based games, and then be like, okay, what's a gameplay thing we can add to the story that makes sense, that if you say to somebody like, okay, it's a game about a character that does blah, 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 but mechanically they fight with a leaf or something like that. I don't freaking know. Something very interesting and hooky. That's what is gonna draw somebody to being like, oh, I'm gonna play your game as opposed to the thousands of other games that are out there.
Yeah. And I'm on the Unity and the game dev subreddits quite a lot, and I see people are releasing games and not getting the results that they want, which, it's never a known thing. I mean, and people are discouraged by this, to release their games. But I think, you do need some kind of hook to draw people in, and you need the bandwidth to market too. And we'll get to that later, but it's all part of the marketing, like the hook and how you market the game is important. So that kind of ties back to the hook.
And I think when you're in the ideation stage, you don't need to go so crazy being like, this is the perfect thing, but it's like the hook is what creates the foundation of the rest of your game mechanics, because they all feed off of that. So like in Celeste is a good example of like a pretty easy hook for me to identify, and it's the fact that it's very quick levels. You're scaling a mountain, and all she has is kind of like a run and a double jump ability to get through the levels. And it's a very easy way to visually like understand like, oh, this game is going to be fun because it's very fast paced. It's very complex getting through the levels. But if I die, I know I'm going to go back really quickly. So I'm not like waiting for a loading screen. So like these are the types of concepts to be thinking about when you're developing the idea of the mechanics to make a very compelling type of game. So some of the other ones I have listed in my notes is like the Leviathan axe from God of War is a very good mechanical hook. Like it's very obvious, like, okay, it's got ice powers, and not only can you use an axe like this, like to chop things, but you can throw it and recall it as you wish and hit enemies on the way back. And that in itself kind of distinguishes Kratos' moveset from what we were used to with the Blades of Chaos, which are very like, fast paced and kind of, and that
and you can use it to solve puzzles too.
Yeah. Yep.
So,
another gameplay type of hook, is, the Souls and Souls games, right? The whole mechanic of venturing as far as you can until you die, you drop your souls, it boots you back to a checkpoint, and then the only way to redeem those souls, which goes towards your character progression, is getting back to that point. And if you die before then, you lose everything, right? So I'm sure these developers all have like one-liner, elevator pitches to explain these things. Yeah. I wouldn't know how to explain their game for them. But with our game, we have our song casting mechanic. We've kind of developed a genre within itself to describe, you think of song casting. Okay, it's got something to do with music. Casting has something to do with magic and spells. And that's our mechanical hook, where you get to strum your instrument, input commands to cast different sorts of spells, and use that to your advantage in combat scenarios.
Yeah, I think also if you're somebody who has a lot of good ideas, but you don't have, some of these technical skills like drawing and programming, I'd recommend you pick up one of those skills if you can, or become somebody who can do marketing. If you're a CEO type, you can do like the business side of things. If you can do that, if you have a lot of ideas, write them down and show them to people. Don't give it to them, but show them. Be like, hey, I have all these ideas. You're a programmer. You're an artist. Like, do you guys want to meet up and make this, with me?
I'd recommend too, though, for people that are like idea people, to get into whatever easiest game engine software they can, which is something like Game Maker, for example, which is another free one. And as far as I know, that is very user friendly to really anybody. You're going to have to learn a couple tutorials to get through it, but being able to build your own prototype in some capacity, I think, is the strongest way to show and not just tell, because you can actually have somebody play a very small prototype of like what you're trying to concept, and then hire people or get people to collab with you to do the more like complicated stuff.
Right. And just do the tutorials too. Like, there's step-by-step tutorials. At the end of the tutorial, you'll just feel happy to have something that you made.
Yeah.
Even if it's a tutorial, you're like, hey, I made this. Like, I put this all together. Then try to put it back together without using the tutorial. Then you're now you're starting to cook. So
yeah.
I think
what I did when I was first doing tutorials was followed the tutorial, but then kind of tweaked things and added my own art assets, and it's like pretty easy to swap a template to something that's a little bit more uniquely yours. Just from a few lines of code, you know?
Mhm.
So yeah, that's the ideation phase. Then you go into pre-production. So let's say you're either going to solo dev it or you have a small team. This is where you would really get into your game design document, which is kind of listing out all the mechanics, you know, further listing your hook. You know, what does your character do? What is their motivation if it's story driven? How many levels is it going to have? How many areas? Is it open world? Is it linear? You know, this is your place to have like this running living list essentially of like every single thing that is going to be in your game. And we're not like super huge sticklers on like this like perfect GDD, and I think it's probably because you and I are kind of like spearheading the project and we both know what's up. I think it's
sometimes design decisions later on kind of kick back and influence prior decisions. So it's like having to go and update all that stuff is kind of tedious at times.
But if you have like a massive team, having a really concise GDD like is super important, because then any of your team member can refer to it and they don't have to ask you. They don't know. They'll all know what's up. So alongside, you know, your game design document, this is also where concept art plays a role. So, you know, developing designs like this, you know, this is a big turning point, because is your game 2D? Is it 3D? Is it pixel art? Is it like hand painted like ours? There's a lot of different approaches to developing concept art, and there's different ways to kind of overdo it or underdo it. You definitely want to develop an aesthetic for your world. And a good example of like literally the most simple game I could possibly think of is there was this game called Thomas Was Alone. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, it's like a bunch of shapes.
Yeah, you're just playing as like blocks essentially. So obviously like you could kind of get away with some mock-ups of what a screen would look like, and that would essentially be your concept art, just to showcase like, okay, here's the aesthetic that I'm going to roll with for the rest of the game.
And that game Zarvat was literally about blocks too.
Yeah, that's another one.
So that one came out like a long time ago, but we knew the dev, Sam Eng, and he made a game literally about blocks. So
yeah, but from what I remember, he had cool environments around, so possibly he needed some concept art for that. I don't know if he just kit bashed stuff or what, but yeah. And then on the programming side, in the pre-production phase, you gotta start prototyping your mechanics. So like getting them to like very, very basically work. And I would not be so worried about having, like Arman was saying before, like the most finalized art or assets. It's like at this point, you gotta, if you can just, let's say you're playing with a 2D game, if you can make it fun to have a little block move around and do the thing you want it to do, then you're gonna inevitably have a fun game when you have really beautiful graphics, right? So that's kind of the mentality to think about, is like, it should be fun.
If you have like a run and gun, like top down game, like you're going to start off your game with a block, an asset that shoots a little like ball out of it. And the ball's probably just going to come right from the middle of the block.
Yeah.
It's not going to have a gun or anything. It's just the concept, right? I have a thing here. It shoots something out of it. That's where you start, right? And then from there, you can say, okay, instead of just starting from the middle of the block, it starts from here, which is where the weapon position is, right? So then you go from there. Now the next thing is, I need to have a dash ability. I'm going to make my block be able to dash. So you implement that. And it's like all these little things. You have enemies
to destroy.
Yeah.
And then like the enemies have different types of speeds. And it's like, that's where you start making the game have more layers and be more compelling and more interesting.
Yeah. And this is also why it takes so long, is because it doesn't happen overnight. I mean, you build something, you improve it. You know, every day you work, you find something new to add, to create, to improve, and by the time you notice, it's a month has gone by. You're like, I got all these things done, and my game still needs all these things.
But this is also where we should say in the GDD, this is how you can help scope yourself. So let's go off of that example of a run and gun game. Right? Like this is where in your GDD you can be like, okay, if I'm a solo dev, let's just say, it's not going to be possible for me to generate 100 unique levels. Let's say reasonably I can make 10 levels, right? I want to get my game done in 6 months. Probably make 10 levels in 6 months. Okay, what's going to be in each level? Maybe there's 5 different enemy types and like a boss or something like that. This is how you can make sure you're following some sort of guide for yourself and you're not getting it. The term is feature creep in game development, where you're like, let me add this and this and this and this. Because at the end of the day, let's say 6 months rolls by and you do have your 10 levels, your enemies, your boss, and your fun gameplay mechanics. You then have the opportunity to be like, okay, what can I now do to push this over the top? Maybe there's secret levels that you can find or something like that. Or maybe there's power-ups that I can integrate within the 10 levels that I already have that will make going from level to level be more fun. So yeah, kind of starting in like a building block, like pyramid sort of way, I think is a good approach for first time or solo devs.
And for programmers, I mean, you're going to start programming and your code is not going to be the cleanest. I think Unity also kind of doesn't enforce a lot of the normal coding practices that you would do in other languages, like type, what do you call it, like private versus public and things like that. I think those are things that you need to learn aside from programming, because you can just make everything public technically in Unity if you're a solo dev. I mean, but at the end of the day, it's always good to just kind of go back and refactor your code. It's not going to be pretty in the beginning, I'll tell you that. You're going to learn things throughout the programming process that you're like, all right, this stuff needs to get revised because this was written before I figured out how to do these great things. So we've done that on our projects. We've gone back and kind of been like, this is old code. What is this? Like, we even look at it, we're like, wow, I wrote this. Like, so and I also think, like, with scope creep, I want to jump back to that. As you add new elements, if you're not interfacing your programming objects properly, using, like, for example, like interfaces or something, you're going to start experiencing a lot of pain because you don't have a common way for your objects to talk to each other and handle those situations. So if you're adding 4 new abilities, you need to have some way for the enemies or something to react to those. Like, maybe you burn them, you freeze them, you stun them. All those enemies need to, have a common way of dealing with those status abilities. So you need to pick up new skills like interfaces and things like that. So
it's like what you're saying is just kind of thinking ahead with what you might want to add and accounting for it as best you can now, so you don't have a huge headache later.
Right. There's a big design component that comes into video games. And if you're a new programmer or you're just kind of starting out, I would advise that you look into some programming patterns or some ways to go about doing things on YouTube first. You might just not be able to. A lot of YouTube tutorials, let me put it this way, that I've watched, they don't give you the best solution because it's too advanced.
Yeah.
They'll give you a basic thing that works, and then later on you'll figure out something that is way better, and you'll come back and fix that. Because you'll need to, because you're going to start building a system that works for your whole game, and those things will be excluded because they weren't part of that system after you designed it. So you have to go back and
this is why at the end of the day, when you're building your first game, it should be literally as simple as possible because it can get so out of hand so quickly. Okay, so we kind of covered building a prototype, but I guess the thing in terms of, well, we talked about prototyping, but at the end of the day, you want to have a solid prototype that you can have somebody else play. So this is like a snippet of your level. This would be called a vertical slice, possibly, where you're kind of showcasing your main pillars of the game, like abilities, the like how the character is going to traverse through the level, your main things that you're going to be like seeing over and over in the game. And that way you can showcase a prototype to friends or family or whatever, get feedback. Or if this is your ambition, this is where you can start pitching to people to either get an investment or a publisher, and basically be like, there's this really cool thing I want to build, but I don't have the means to do it by myself or with my small team. Can I have some money, please, and some support to make it better, Yeah. So yeah, the prototype's a pretty important stage.
I will say, though, that the prototype phase, if you're going to show your game to somebody, you better make sure that it's polished, because There have been instances in our past, like when our previous project, where we brought our game to show people, and people always told us, yeah, just make it, just make
Hmm.
it, show it off to the world. But it's got to be, relatively polished. Like they need to pick it up and feel like this is something worth investing into.
Hmm.
And you need to have people play test and figure out how it feels. Does it feel good?
Hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And going off of that, I just thought of something else is you also kind of need to have a pretty good understanding of having played games yourself
Yeah.
to be a good game dev. I strongly feel that. It's like both Armand and I kind of have crossover experience in gameplay, but we also have our own unique experiences playing games. And I think we bring a ton of that to the table with our projects. And it's like we've just seen so many trends and things that are fun in games that it's kind of easy to identify how to bring it into our game.
Yeah.
And I will say there's a lot of things, and this is something that we kind of take a little bit for granted nowadays because we've learned a lot of the basics of this stuff. But there's a lot of things to think about in making a game feel right. So, for example, like with a 2D game like ours, where you're running around and everything feels somewhat flat because you can't move the camera. Okay, how do you give that depth? So, for example, if you get hit by an enemy, the screen needs to just shake a little bit. And it's like a lot of things that even if you are an advanced gamer, you don't quite pick up on it because it feels like a subconscious thing.
Right.
Or, for example, like you interact with an object, like that needs to have a sound effect to like feel like you just actually interacted with it. And there's like hundreds of those things at this point that we've kind of begun to integrate and learned over time or pulled from previous experience. But yeah, that's just the other thing to add in the prototype stage. So then you move it. Sorry, was there something else you want to say?
I also wanted to say another thing that we forgot to talk about is building good tools.
Mm.
We had a problem when we first started, which was building out levels fast.
Mm-hmm.
Because we were literally copying and pasting like a bunch of assets over and over again, like duplicating assets. And we're like, there's got to be a better way to do this. And in Unity, there's spline tools now. So you can basically like create splines and attach objects to it. We had a programmer work with us, Diego, and he basically made some tools for us.
Mm-hmm.
And those tools saved us so much time. I mean, like so much time.
Yeah.
I mean, it would have been a 6 to 7 year project versus 4 or 5 or whatever, So that's how much of a difference it made. So those things are things you need to go and research. Say what kind of tools can help me build my game faster. Do some research. You're still gonna have to put a lot of things together. You're gonna have to read documentation, figure out how it works.
Mm-hmm.
There's no getting around that. It's just how it is, right? It's like an instruction manual, right? But find the tools that kind of help you and build them, or have somebody else build them for you.
Yeah.
And
I think it's when you encounter any situation during your development journey where you're like, man, this is taking me so long, there's got to be a better way. That's when you have to be like, okay, Google, help me find a better way to do this. And there's bound to be a better way to do it, or somebody that knows how to build a better way for you.
Right. Like we bought the dialogue system for Unity package on Unity Store. And that thing saved us so much time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it had a dialogue system. It had like events that we could do off of triggers,
save system,
all kinds of things. So, speech bubbles, all these different aspects of the game.
And these are the kinds of mechanics that like most games have, right? It's like you want to have a save system anyway, so you might as well just not reinvent the wheel and just download a save system for your game, or find somebody online that has done it already and kind of follow a tutorial. Okay, so yeah, you've built your prototype, you started to get the word out and kind of see what people think about your cool mechanics. Now you move into like actual like legitimate production. So that's like finalizing assets, hardcore testing, building out your levels, like kind of building out like the roadmap for the rest of your game and like actually getting the pieces in. And this is also where you want to be testing your own game as much as you possibly can throughout the process. And you need to ask yourself the honest question of like, is my own game fun? Is it still fun, even though I've been working on it for months and months or years and years? And that's something we've had to ask ourselves quite a lot. And like, I'm happy to report that after so much time, I still play our own game, and I'm like,
Yeah.
man, our game is really fun.
Yeah.
So you want to have that feeling, I guess, is what I'm
Yeah.
saying, like for the whole duration of your project.
Yeah.
And then this is also where you want to continue to like follow the GDD, create spreadsheets, create whatever you need to get yourself on track and get things done in a timely manner. It's kind of like production is funny because it's the longest phase out of all of these, but it's the easiest to explain because it's literally just like hustling and doing the work and getting stuff completed.
Right.
Yeah. So then, yeah. Do you have anything else to say about production?
No, we can move on.
Okay. So then the next point would be post-production, which is, really getting people to test and bug fix. I'd recommend either hiring testers, or if you have a robust enough team, making sure they're testing, making sure there's no holes in your level that the character can fall through,
Or
make sure that you can't get stuck anywhere, whatever.
Or what I like to do is when I create a new mechanic or something, I test the hell out of it. Like I see, okay, I made like this new ability. Like, how does it affect these things? Like, I drop enemies in. I'm like, how does it affect these enemies? How does it affect those enemies? Like, I just kind of do an all around test to make sure that it can interact. I don't just build the thing and say, okay, it's done. I kind of put it into a scenario and see how it
works in context.
So I think that's kind of like testing as you're going. So you're not kind of testing everything at the end.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you'll add new features that kind of impact a big part of the game. Like it could be like a core gameplay mechanic. Like maybe you implement like a shield system and now you need to go back and figure out how that works with a lot of other things, right? So maybe you get an upgrade that upgrades your health system or your shield system. Like, how does that all work?
Yeah.
Right. So.
And that what you're talking about probably still falls under like production. You don't want to be working on that stuff like after you've already decided the game is like kind of at a final point.
But you might have to, if in post-production you find a bug, you have to go back and fix it, right?
Yes. So this is also where you're going to start developing your marketing plan. And this is something we were kind of talking about earlier, but marketing is like it's like 2/3 of what the actual project is, even though 99% of what you've been doing is actually making the game. It's like if you don't market your game, then nobody's going to play your game, right? That's the kind of cold hard truth. And it doesn't mean that we're saying every single person needs to sell their game, make a ton of money, but at the end of the day, even if you are doing something for fun but you really feel like it's got tooth to it, at the very least, even if you're distributing it for free on one of these like Game Jolt or one of those sites, you still want tons and tons and tons of people to play it and give you feedback, because that could reinforce your next game that you could make a bunch of money from and could have a career out of, right? Because at the end of the day, this is, at least for us, like what we're doing, this is like a career-oriented path. And if you're interested in game dev, you're probably thinking like, this is something I'd probably want to do with my life sort of situation. So that's why this step is so integral. And again, like there's different ranges of this. There's different amounts of money you could put into this. You could do this completely organically. You could do this for millions of dollars. You could get help. You could do this by yourself. It kind of depends on what type of project you have and what you want to do with it. But I guess we could kind of just describe like some of the avenues you could go through in terms of marketing. So one of which is the obvious. It's just like generalized like paid ads and social media advertisement. I wouldn't bank on just paid ads unless you have like literal millions of dollars to put into it. But I think going off of the hook of what we described earlier, this is something that you can inject into a trailer and social media clips to try to generate more of an organic marketing scenario where people just want to share it because they're like, this is so cool. Like, this is really interesting, unique, whatever. And we've seen instances of that. I'm trying to think off the top of my head of one that was like more of a viral sort of scenario.
Of a game like being viral, like a game ad.
Yeah.
Black Myth Wukong. I mean, I guess that's
they had a buttload of money to put into that though.
Okay, yeah, I guess for like a smaller studio, Nik.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely had money too, but I would probably say, yeah, that's maybe a good example of just kind of showcasing the vibe, and a bunch of people looking at that game being like, oh, that reminds me of old school Zelda.
Right.
That
Or
looks really fun.
what's the Genshin Impact? Those kinds of games.
Yeah, but they also have like ungodly amounts of money.
Yeah.
So I guess that is to say that like you should not take for granted if you're looking at your own small project and be like, why am I not reaching millions of people? It's because you're underestimating how much money is being pumped into some of these projects that you think didn't cost a lot of money.
And some projects get lucky and go
Yeah.
viral, but it's like you can't just bank on something going viral, right?
And you can't bank on one avenue, I think, is probably the biggest thing. If you're if you have a smaller budget or are just trying to do things more organically, it's got to be like a multifaceted, thing. So that would be making social media content, joining Discords and sharing your game, going on Reddit and sharing your game,
Going to conventions,
going to
or like game dev
conventions.
meetups, having people play test your game or
Yep.
check it out.
Yeah, I'm sure this is another thing we should just mention as a resource, but every, major city should have a IGDA, which is a International Game Developer Association that you can join for free. You should be able to join for free. And it just is other game devs in your city. We've gone, when we lived in Philly, we would meet up with those guys. We've attended a bunch of the Houston events as well.
We actually met Jeff there, right?
Yeah, we met Jeff.
Jeff and Nate.
Yeah.
Met them both there.
Yeah, a lot of our really good game dev friends have been from either IGDA or going to conventions and conferences and stuff. So I would probably say in terms of your early game dev journey, that's the most important thing, because you're going to meet people that are going to either inspire you or help you along your path. I mean, Andrew is another one that, we met from
Y2K.
Yeah, from PAX.
I also knew an Andrew from Avaria.
Yeah.
So yeah, we met some cool people at these conventions, and we join each other's Discords, and we meet their fans and like play their games with them, and it's cool. It's like a fun environment, but at the end of the day, it's like you gotta set aside time. There's time for marketing and networking, and then there's time for programming stuff. And this stuff is like a full on job. Like it's so draining. Like Nick does a lot of our like business stuff, and if you're a business guy and you want to do and you love video games and you're a business guy and you want to be the CEO, that's great, because your game, if you want to make money off your game, you are going to need that. And I think some people maybe underestimate how difficult or don't understand how difficult it can be to just be the CEO. Like there's a lot of money stuff you have to handle. If you have a team, you got to pay them. You have to think about marketing. You got to think about like, is your studio going to make it through the project? How are you going to network to people? You got to make connections on LinkedIn, go to conventions, meet people, right?
The amount of like pitch decks and the amount of time we've developed, even like we'd never written a pitch deck before. Right. Even the learning process of understanding how to break down our game in a way that was digestible for somebody else to understand is like half the battle. And I think that's maybe a good skill to learn too, because that reinforces a lot of the marketing stuff you end up doing. Once we kind of built those things for ourselves and for our team, it was a lot easier then to be like, oh, we're going to run an ad or we're going to make content about our game online. We already have these like key phrases or whatever that we can kind of double down on.
And I feel like too, in the industry, like people who might be interested in funding or publishing you, sometimes they don't know what they want to see until they see it. So I feel like we got different advice from different publishers and investors, and sometimes those things just didn't apply to the next publisher or investor we talked to. We just had to calibrate based on like the person we were talking to at the time. There was no one-stop solution for how to network or how to get your game out there. It's kind of like you need to adapt and like understand what these people are looking for, what's their portfolio look like, this and that. So there's research that goes into it,
Yeah, and I would say at the end of the day, any of the success we've found in that regard has been from us knowing how to talk about our game the best we possibly could. And that was a skill that we learned over time. I mean, dude, we even do you remember in the Philly IGDA we were asked to do like presentations a couple times? So those types of opportunities we got, I think really helped strengthen our, ability to market like relatively well ourselves, and then therefore bring it to other people to be like, hey, here's why we have a cool project, because we actually know how to describe how it's cool now.
Right.
Going to conventions and like showing your work live too is another big learning process, because I remember the first couple ones, or at the very least the first couple days of doing the very first convention, at least for me, it was like scary to like showcase our art essentially that we've been working on for such a long time.
Yeah.
And just get feedback. It's not always going to be good feedback. I think that's the other thing we've been missing from this conversation. But, at the end of the day, you might think you have a really genius idea, but it might not be a genius idea. And that's just what it is. But you take the feedback you get from people. You don't have to take everyone's feedback, because sometimes people have really bad feedback too, we've learned. But take the feedback you feel applies, and like Arman said, kind of recalibrate based on that, and that's how you're going to give your project the best chance of doing well for itself.
Yeah, definitely ask yourself why. Like, whenever it's something like that happens, be like, why didn't they enjoy it? Like, what can I do to make it better? And always have that kind of mentality that you're going to improve it, because at the end of the day, it's going to be your baby, right? You're going to, if this is your passion, like, you need to treat it like your passion. You need to kind of nurture it and let it grow and evolve. So I think that's an important part of it, is really like embracing it. And don't be afraid to fail. I mean, we failed many times, but we failed so many times, and honestly, it was a huge letdown.
Yeah.
And it can really kind of weigh you down, but you just have to kind of keep going and pretend like it didn't happen. So definitely try it. Give yourself a chance, so if you guys know, there's a guy on YouTube called Pirate Software.
Oh, I love that guy.
Yeah, and I like watch all his shorts, and even he gives me, motivation to he gives me motivation to like work on my games, and he brings up very interesting topics, like mental dilemmas that developers constantly face, like fear of releasing their game, fear of finishing their project, fear of bad code, fear of people looking at their game and not liking it, and kind of giving some interesting perspectives. So definitely find somebody, and maybe an influencer, or like a mentor that can kind of uplift you and kind of keep you going. So,
and that being said too, we're happy to chat with any of you guys in the Discord about this stuff too. If you're newbie devs, we love talking to.
We've had people in the Discord ask us questions about like, pacing of games. Thanks for everybody who's been in the Discord and been asking us questions like that. I think it gets us excited too, to talk about what we've done, because we sort of have to reflect a bit on where we're at.
Yeah.
And kind of give a perspective. So
yeah. Cool. I think that's a good place to wrap it up.
I guess one other thing is maybe talking about your Steam page, because maybe I've seen people bring things up about their Steam page. If you want your game on Steam, that's great. There's a lot of things you need to do when you get on Steam. Like, if you have a company, you need to have like your company number, your
established as an
tax
LLC
number,
or whatever.
LLC, and all that stuff. So if you're going to go that route, if you want to make money off your game, you need to have your company established, which is a whole process in and of itself. Right. And that's where your CEO comes in, and the person who handles the money comes in. Right. And then you got to make the decision. Are you going to push your game on Steam? Or are you just going to wait? Maybe just wait until it's fully polished before you put it on there, because it's a bit of a process. And right now, most games can kind of get on Steam, no problem. But definitely weigh the thought of if you want to put it up or not. It's really up to you.
I think for us with Traveler's Refrain in particular, because it felt like with Mask of Semblance, we were still new and we were still learning. We wanted to get it out as soon as possible so that we could start learning fast, right? And I think that was to our benefit, even though that project we had to move on from that one. But I think for Traveler's Refrain, we were like, okay, we learned everything we needed to learn from Mask of Semblance, or at least a lot of things from Mask of Semblance. Now let's just make the best game we possibly can, and then go out with a bang. And I think actually that was a pretty good move for us. Maybe we could have started showing a little bit earlier. But the other thing too is when you start diving into the marketing portion, it takes away from development.
Right.
And that's the other option we had to weigh, because we have our hands in the engine and with the assets so much that it's like we couldn't afford to spend half the week on marketing and half the week on dev. We had to just get the game moving. So that's another thing to it's kind of like a personal question to ask yourself. I think some people have a very strong like, oh, show your game day one, and some people are like, don't show your game until it's finished sort of mentality. But I think it just depends on you and the project and the situation more than anything.
Yeah.
So
and also, if you're going to release content of your game out there, I would recommend putting some type of version number or putting an alpha on it if it's really early in development. Because I think one thing we learned was we put out a lot of gameplay videos or demos that didn't have that. And so if you were to look up Mask of Semblance, there's like 2 very different builds of Mask of Semblance online, and one's a very old one, and another one is the final version. And if you look it up and you see the first version, you might be like, okay, this game looks kind of crappy. But then you stumble upon the better looking one, you're like, okay, like why does this one look so different? And we just literally forgot to put the version, or like that it was
I think
alpha.
we just didn't know.
We didn't know, and that goes back to what you were saying about getting it out earlier, but it could also be to your detriment if you don't market properly.
Yeah, definitely. Cool.
It's kind of a pun. Market.
Yeah.
Get it? Market. Anyway.
All right, guys. Well, we hope you found this interesting. Let us know in the Discord if this was compelling to you. Maybe we'll do more stuff here and there like this discussion. But yeah, this was a fun one. And
you've been watching our podcasts. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And thanks for sharing it and for commenting and engaging with us. I think. It's definitely something that we want to keep doing. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, be sure to like and subscribe. Go play our demo on Steam, Traveler's Refrain, and we will see you guys next time.
See you.
Bye, guys.